So hello, everyone out there. My name's Elizabeth East. I'm a director at LA Louver Gallery. And I am thrilled today to be joined by two artists whom I've worked with during my time at the gallery. Not sure where they are on your screen, but Gajin Fujita and Matt Wedel. And I'm joining you from my home in West Los Angeles. Gajin is across town, some ways east. And Matt is zooming in from his home outside of Athens in Ohio. So very different circumstances. So I think both of the artists need very little introduction. I'm sure most of you out there know both artists' works. I've worked with Gajin since around 2001. In fact, when I was thinking of a way to more interestingly introduce them, I thought I would. An interesting observation I had was that we actually started working at the gallery around the same time in both of your careers. Gajin, you had just left University of Nevada, Las Vegas in 2000. Right. So we showed your work in 2001 in the very first Rogue Wave show that we presented. Right. And we gave you the first solo show a year later, Wicked Beauty, which was recently nominated by our audience as the best show in our history. Congratulations, by popular vote. And Matt, we included your work in the 2009 Rogue Wave presentation that we made. And you did a project show a year after, and then of course, extraordinary exhibition Sheep's Head a couple of years after that. So I've worked with Gajin for, gosh, almost 20 years now. Wow. We've kind of grown up together, Gajin, although I'm a little bit older than you. And Matt worked with you for about 10 years. Yeah. So maybe I was thinking also whether you've actually shown at the same time, and I could only think of the 2014 exhibition of drawings when, Matt, you had that great head in our open air sky room. But do you remember when you first noted each other's work or first met each other?
I mean, I think for me, it was like, Chris Pate emailed me for that Rogue Wave show. And I think for me, I was in Canada. I was teaching at NASCAD University and just kind of like adrift, in my practice, in my kind of exhibitions. I was just kind of making work and didn't really have a context, like a gallery context for that work. And so I think I got that email and was looking up LA Louver Gallery. And unfortunately, like my naivety, even when in LA, like when I was working there, I usually am so much in my head, that I didn't get out enough to see art galleries when I was a grad student and when I would live there. But so I did research in the gallery and I saw Gajin's work in the first Rogue Wave show, and it was just like totally radical work. And made me really excited about, participating in the show. And that kind of, that entrance really, built the foundation, of the relationship we have now. And I had a great opportunity to come visit your show in 2011, the Made in LA show. And that was great. I wish I could come out more often, I get jealous of you being able to go to all the openings. I think I have to have a relationship from afar a little bit. And I'm really lucky to have one of your pieces, and that is in our home, and we cherish that. My kids cherish that, and animates their kind of psychology, their sense of the world and history and artistic. So I have a great admiration for your work. And
thank you, Matt. And likewise, I have admiration for your work as well. But I first was introduced to Matt's work at the gallery at LA Louver. I think Peter Goulds was just over the moon about your pieces, and all the other directors as well. And he took me to the back room, and I think that's where I became aware of your work. And that actually was not even the back showing room, but it was the side room where they keep all the works on paper and things that are framed, I guess. There were small pieces of yours. I think they were like the floral plant-like pieces, and Peter was just like gassed over them, just like, wow, these are amazing. And I was like, wow, these are a trip. You know, I've seen and I've had many ceramic artist friends, or just artist friends that were in ceramics, and never seen anything like that. And then I had the pleasure of being able to trade work with Matt, and that was a really cool experience, and it was nice meeting you, nice having you over.
Yeah.
The studio in the house, and that was pretty much my first contact and experience with you hanging out. And that was really cool. I forgot what year was that. That was like 2012 or something like that. Right?
So, yeah, no. So, I mean, I think it's interesting. I think I like your work. I think we both, I'm interested in this conversation, you know, is this way to kind of like get at our some of the similarities between our influences, some of the differences between our practices, and yeah, like how I want to know like what your psychology is, you know, beyond your work, you know, like I've been thinking a lot about like reality, and like how we all create this kind of concept of reality, and probably it's a byproduct of like being at home, you know, from this quarantine thing, of just being, my reality being, all of our collective realities just being stressed, right? And fragmented and under question, you know? And I think for me, it's like there's been this whole attempt at trying to piece together my reality, right? And I don't know, so for me, like I'd love to talk about that and hear from you too, like what's going on in your head, and like what you're thinking about and challenged by in your practice, and like what you're excited about and terrified about, you know, and yeah. So I don't know, Elizabeth, how you want to kind of navigate that.
Yeah, I mean, you touched on actually what my first question was going to be, because sort of on the surface of it, I think people would think you have a very different approach to your work. I mean, the adjectives that are assigned to your work are Gajin, it's like Japanese art history fused with very contemporary culture, graffiti, sort of you live in an urban environment, whereas Matt is living in a very rural environment. He's making figurative work, these sort of magical, flower-oriented pieces. But I think for me, both of them, there's a sort of an attachment to art history. There's certainly an honoring in different ways to art history. And I was wondering if you could speak to your individual influences on that particular subject. Maybe first starting with you, Gajin.
Sure. Influences of art history, yeah. Well, we were, you know, there are things in my work that I reference and are influenced by that are not in your art history text per se. So that would be things like, I look at tattoos, Japanese traditional tattooing, you know, and then of course the woodblock prints, anything from, I started out using the Shunga woodblock prints, which are like the erotic woodblock prints. And they're all from like the Edo period, which is 18th century all the way up onto like the late 19th century. And
did you grow up looking at those? You know, when you were a young boy, how were you first introduced to all of that imagery?
I think it was through my mom, because she was conserving Japanese and Asian antiquity, but she wasn't really fixing woodblock prints, but she was fixing and conserving things like samurai armors, and mending ceramics with gold. That's what is that called? I forgot what it was called in Japanese. I should know this. And then from time to time, she would bring home these woodblock prints, and it would just be intriguing because it was so full of color, and it would blow my mind because these were made like couple hundred years ago, and the colors were so vivid. And then afterwards, the stories that and the tales that some of these woodblock prints had narrated in the print also intrigued me. So there's the antiques for sure, and you know, I would reference things from old ceramic vases to textile on old silk woven robes and stuff. So, you know, and then graffiti is like a huge influence to me, like street art and stuff that I had seen as a child growing up in Boyle Heights, kind of in this urban setting, and having to traverse town on a school bus or the metro, from east to west and west to east, round trip on a daily basis going to school. I got to see a lot of different styles and aesthetics of graffiti along the way. So I think those are some of the influences.
Yeah, I'm curious about, like, what do you think is the influence between, or the connection between, kind of graffiti and some of these influences that were also outside of art history, you know, or like the allure or kind of curiosity or admiration for like things from history that might not have been within the canon of high art, you know? I don't know, I think about that a lot in my practice in terms of references to folk art and the influences of folk art as this kind of category of making, cultural production, cultural making that was never really deemed high art, you know, or significant in relation to, you know, it was always in the folk art books, you know. And I'm curious about, like, and so for me, I think there's a connection point between us in terms of those being kind of like foundational reference points of like objects from history, cultural objects from history as like reference point, and probably in some argument with the canon of fine art, you know?
Yeah, well, graffiti, I think, graffiti is like a whole culture in itself, and it comes from an urban environment, I think, and it's ingrained in hip hop culture, I think, and hip hop culture is more like kind of folk art, I think. You know, it comes from the streets. People were practicing it on the streets and not necessarily in a studio or anything. Or
it's a gesture made outside of the context of art. You know, it's like an art gesture.
Yeah.
Not even caring about art, you know. It's
yeah. I think, and at times I feel like it's more not high art, like pure art in making or creating and doing things, not thinking about art, but just doing it. And I think that's like a true, pure form of art. You know, we're not driven commercially, or we're not, you know, driven by media or anything like that. We're out there doing it for the love of it, and maybe
or the fictional idea of what art should be. You know, it's not about that.
right,
You know?
right. And
What do you think about? I'm sorry, man.
no, I really embraced those ideas early on when I was practicing graffiti. It's because you go out and do graffiti. We had to go steal paint because we were still like teenagers. I couldn't ask my dad or my mom to go buy me spray paint. You know, we would have to go steal paint from the paint stores, and it was like a whole sort of mission that we were on, and it was really capturing the edge. I didn't even know it, but it was edgy, you know, and it wasn't things that people were doing like now. I think graffiti has become, and street art has become, very global, and it's widely accepted now. But back when in the 80s, when I started practicing, you know, people looked at you strange because you told them you were a graffiti artist, you know. But the purity of it, I think, I really embraced and I loved, because you were doing it for the love of it. You know, why would someone want to like go risk their freedom and go put up a mural in the middle of the night? And so you had to be stealth. You had to be like a street ninja in a way to go catch spots, and you know, and all of that was the thrill of pulling off a caper. You know, you pulled something off. And
Are you still pulling it off, Gajin? When did you last,
pulling it off.
pull those off?
Now, pulling it off in my studio.
But you did actually work on a mural recently. Is that not the case?
Yeah, I did, but it was more like a reunion. It was like a memorial piece for. There it is. It says red, and I did the fonts, and I worked on this piece with my friends from the KGB crew, Kids Gone Bad crew, a graffiti crew that has been around in LA since '85, I'd like to say. And so that's my crew. But
and where is this?
This is straight up on the street, on a wall at a car wash off of 3rd Street near Normandy in K-Town, in Koreatown.
What do you think is more allows space for that kind of freedom, you know, mentally, that you find in graffiti? Is it like this sense of like, do you feel a different stress making like quote art, you know, versus doing a piece on the wall? Do you feel freer maybe making that work, or under a less kind of lens, or I don't know. In one hand, it's a bigger audience, you know, because it's
a bigger audience, and so there's that pressure of wanting to put something decent down. Because you're also, I feel like I'm also representing the graffiti crew, you know, and I don't want to put something up that's whack, you know.
Right. That differentiate between your paintings, do you think?
How does that differentiate when
you think there's like different, I mean, for me, it's like, I think about like, so when I'm like trying to make art, and I get, the art seems like contained within this like assumption of what art should be, rather than just let to be it what it is. You know, for me, just this kind of like, I've been working on trying to let my art not try to follow the rules of what I assume art should be. Like that's why I've been painting for a while now, and I've always like held that as like a side practice. And I throw pots, you know, as a way of like, I make pots because I love them, and it's like a way of engaging kind of cultural history and kind of gesture and language, like emotive bodily language. And it seems it's like without any of the stress, it's like all the beauty of art making without any of the kind of like dogma of art making, right? It's just like physical, emotional, just connection of like a pure, you know, connection, you know. And then I was like, why is that more pure? Like, why can't I make my art that way? Like, why am I reserving that for myself? Like, why can't I just do that why can't I take this work as seriously if it does have that purity, you know, as seriously as kind of this like larger sculpture object, you know? Like, how do I make that be as much of a free exploration as the things that I might be worried aren't kind of quote high art? Does that make sense?
I think I can.
It sounds like there's something that's holding you back in your the sort of high art that you're talking about, your own art. I mean, I think for me, you've always pushed the material way beyond and been very subversive in a sort of very different way that Gajin has spoken about, is sort of challenging, defying or violating certain quote rules, whatever these rules or wherever these rules came from.
Right.
So
I think that we all have our concept of, we create this fictional concept of what art is, and that kind of creates these boundaries that we try to function within. And that whole concept is just a fiction, you know. Art's not this fixed thing, you know. It's like, and I keep trying in my practice to try to kind of allow my mind to function outside of as much as possible, outside of my assumptions of what art is. And I think part of that comes into this things that are like pure or just like spiritually, emotionally charged spaces of thinking through making, you know? I don't know. I was wondering for you though, Gajin, like if there was a different like psychological state in graffiti versus like in the painting behind you, like in that tag and in your depiction of that samurai, you know, like it's a different kind of pictorial language. It's a different
different
in a way.
messages as well.
Yeah.
When you're doing graffiti out in the streets, you don't have the luxury of, well, in that mural we had the luxury of time, and we were able to, you know, preconceive what we were going to paint and stuff like that. But when you're doing graffiti, like graffiti, you're out there doing illegal things, you know, you're vandalizing and stuff. So you don't have that luxury of time. So you practice at home or what in your studio, your tag or whatever, and you try to copy that when you're out in the streets with the spray can or whatnot, you know. And it's just practicing, but it's a total different mindset, I think, when you're really doing graffiti, like illegal stuff.
So you wouldn't call the depictions of the tags on your painting graffiti?
That, you know, that's like a very hard question to answer.
Because it seems like for me, it's like that's maybe like you, and the images are history, or like your sense of history, your kind of connection, storytelling, something from the past, in kind of the text or the kind of the language, the writing is kind of this something about your hand, like your hand versus history. I think of that too, of like, is it when I pull from history, like at what point is it mine? Like the landscape works, they're amorphous, they're organic. They allow me to kind of like to search and find. I don't have to think about them. Like I know them, like they come out of me and they seem my language, right? And
They're
and,
intrinsic
and
to you. Yeah.
yeah, it's like I don't have to. It's a platform to kind of to trust intuition and kind of sense of self. And then when I work from history, that seems like something from they seem like two different ways of thinking, maybe, or one actively pulling those elements pictorially into your work, one allowing yourself to kind of the freedom emotionally, conceptually to find yourself, your kind of marker of the self. And that, in a way, it seems like the graffiti for some reason, for me in your work, is that, like a mark of you present you. Does that make sense? Versus like a historical you.
Right. No, it definitely makes sense. And as
But it's
well,
so I was going to say it's the present you, but it's also the present you within the context of other friends, other graffiti artists, where they are at in relationship to you.
Right. So that, I asked my friends and fellow graffiti artists to tag on my paintings because I want to try to capture that essence of the street, which will never happen because the activity of graffiti, I think, is should be done out in public, out in the streets. Once I think, so the tags are done by graffiti artists, and it's their tags when they're on my paintings. But I don't know if I could call it graffiti because it's not really. It's being done in the studio,
Yeah, it's a reference point to art history. It's like in a way, just like your images are a reference point to, like, or the samurai or the tiger or the kind of a demon or the dragon. It's like, in a way, it's the same kind of. It's the same thing, I guess.
But to your question of, do I think about, like, when I'm in my studio, do I think about high art and how am I going to make high art? I don't think I never thought like that. I never thought about that. I think like. Some of my compositions, I take still from graffiti compositions, people who have done, like I looked at Subway Art, this graffiti book done by Martha Cooper and Henry Chalfant. And it's like a Bible to me, but that influenced me a great deal. And when these guys were painting the subways, they would do these huge murals, like a whole cart, and it would be full of not just fonts and text, but there would be characters, cartoon characters, and it would be a whole production. That's what they would call it. And I loved seeing those whole productions. And whenever I'm in my studio now, I always think about these whole productions, paintings that have like great composition. And I try to always sort of follow that sort of rule, I guess, or, formula.
I think it was just like that you're in your like argument with art history, right? Like, I think as a ceramicist, or as a declared ceramicist, like I make my own out of clay, I'm a sculptor, right? But like, I don't have them made, so it's kind of
I see you as a sculptor. I don't.
Yeah, but I think we're all doing the same thing,
Yeah.
I think there's an inherent within that, an argument that has historically taken place within the context of craft and ceramics in the kind of history of art, as like not as a craft material, right? Or material of lesser significance than like gold or bronze or a painting. And so like I think that also roots a lot of my like folk influence, and in seeing the graffiti as also a similar folk influence of like type of a language, a type of expression, cultural expression that exists in argument within the presumed, you know, canon of art history or something. So I think for me, I can't help but to position my work as an inherent kind of ongoing argument with our history, and then it becomes like, and I think that's why maybe I don't have a specific form, specific parameters of making. You know, I think that's why I choose to kind of go from, on one hand, dealing with kind of pictorial image of a flower or a kind of tree form or a figure, but then also while I'm depicting that, starting to being like, what am I doing? Like, what is this? You know, because you do these perpetual actions in the studio, you know, of this, and it's and then I start being like, what is this doing? You know, is this gesture? Is this art? Is this kind of,
I think so.
It becomes like a material, the making, the act of making becomes like a material to kind of explore and to add as new bodies of work, you know? I'm not sure why I started going there. Something about arguing with art history and how do you see kind of, you had talked about violating, or from the Hickey reference,
violating expectations,
expectations, you know. And I think for me, I think of how do I violate my own expectations, you know, and how do I put myself into a position where I feel really uncomfortable and vulnerable and kind of not threatened, even undermining my own conceptual framework, you know. I think you had sent a question beforehand, I saw in your thing that you said rules don't exist or something in your practice, and I was like, oh, that's bullshit. I don't know, I got to change that. I think that was a beginning kind of thing of a very surface argument about not seeing rules. What I think for me, they were parameters of making. That was what I had kind of thought of as rule. Yeah. And I think, everyone has, and so I've just kind of, in my even arguing with myself, you know, because art history is really what your own idea of what art history is, you know. So if you're arguing with art history, you're arguing with yourself. Anyways, where that got us a tangent.
Can you talk a little bit about painting in your work, Matt? Because you've been using, particularly in the last show that we did at the gallery, the actual substance of clay, a sort of what I call the whipped porcelain pieces, very much in a very painterly way, both in working with the material like paint or painting on the body of the clay.
Yeah. There's a picture that we had of that vessel, right? Do you want to put that up? I think art history is ceramic history is full of painting history.
Yeah.
I think most of my influences come from painting history. And this piece, it's it's this object of history, you know, I don't even know if it was intended to be taken, to be held up in such high revere, you know. It was in the culture, but for us to be looking at it now in the context of art history, did it really take itself that seriously? You know, the idea that, anyways, so much of my influence comes from these kind of objects of history that are explorations of thought and perception. And they've historically, I think throughout my work, have been reference points to pull imagery from, to kind of build a language or vocabulary of how to depict my own perception of reality, or what of landscape, of culture. And I think that's always translated. I think early on it was all about the object, you know, in the form of the object, rather than the object as a vehicle for some kind of language or of pictorially, or it as not just a formal or pictorial language too, but it's object within the history of culture. What was happening? What was the psychology? What was the reality that allowed someone to make that? Why can I not make that? You know, no matter what I do, you know, if I try to make it like that in those little chips, then it's it's premeditated, you know, it's the illusion of age, right? I can't make this object, right? It's impossible, right? Without it being a fake, you know? I could do a faux treatments to kind of So I'm interested in like how, even the line quality, the fluidity of thinking, like what cultural framework allowed someone to make mark making like that, and with the freedom or confidence, right? What am I talking about with painting in terms of influence and how that is on my work? I guess you could take that off of there. And I
but
guess that
you also touched on something interesting then about, the context of that pot being made at a time, and what, you're both working now, obviously, and you're in an environment, and obviously drawing from that environment, relating to that environment, affected by that environment. How do you feel, and maybe bringing it into what we're all talking about, being in the environment that we are right now, which is a very challenging environment of distance and seclusion and engagement through mechanisms that we're doing right now. How do you feel that your work currently relates to our current environment? And have you been influenced by what's happened over the last few months?
I feel, I in so many ways, like I think it's this whole process is like destabilized my whole concept of reality, basically, right? Like we're forced to be home, to be by ourselves. We have to change our entire regiment. Everything closes, right? We have to think about the things that we took for granted, of like, how do you put your shoes on, when you come in, or like, where do you put your shoes when you go inside? Like, we have to think about that whole thing. So I think for me, that's caused a tremendous kind of like recalibration of like what I'm doing, like what's the value of art, what's the value of making, what's the value of object, these things that we make, these kind of objects of culture, like how do they function? Is the canon of art kind of missing the point in some way of me trying to make it art? Why can't I make it just like a part of culture? Like, that's why I love graffiti, is it's like it breaks that art barrier where it's just culture, it's actively participating within culture. And like, how do I, as a sculptor and as a thinker, do that? And so I think for me, my work's been more about, these objects are kind of like a place of exploration, of thinking, of negotiating my own psychology, my own sense of self, my own meaning of my own existence, and I think they become like, that's what my work is. It's like this exploration of self, in a marker. And I think art history, it's not really painting versus sculpture. They're just like markers of cultural history, and so for me, this whole time has been this whole question of like, is it really about the object? The objects are triggers in kind of markers of culture, and I think in there is their value, is they can kind of still exist, and kind of carry on that mark, or that kind of language, or that attempt of culture to try to realize itself, or to depict itself. So for me, I'm totally fucked up from this whole coronavirus thing in a shorthand, and feel in a real good way, really liberated, because I've actively dismantled my whole concept of like what art, maybe what I was thinking art was. And yeah, so in that way, it was really good.
I mean, in a way, it is challenging you to think differently, to break rules, to engage differently, not to put a too positive spin on it, but I mean, what would you say to that, Gajin? Has your practice changed? I mean, what has happened with regard to friends tagging on the work? Are they still coming over?
Yeah, that has changed up a little bit. I've been fortunate that I've collected many tags, but I've run out of panels that have tagged on by my friends. So yeah, now I'm gonna soon be facing some challenges. Yeah, they're gonna have to come masked up, and there's gonna be a little bit of change, but I don't think I'm thinking as deeply as Matt is about how my practice or thinking about art history and art and stuff like that. I'm just making things. I feel like I've been isolated and practicing isolation from doing so much work my entire career anyways. So I don't know. I just feel like I better up my game now because all these other artists are at home or in their studio, improving upon themselves every day, I think, so.
So you're feeling competition, in other words?
You gotta remember that that's a total illusion. Like I can really function, like I'm surrounded by my stuff because like sculptures take up space and I don't know what to do with it. Right. And like, it looks like I'm working like crazy, but I can, my wife got a new job, so I'm full-time, dad, and it's crazy, so like don't be hard on yourself. I think for me it's like, and also like me talking about this stuff, it's more of like also a way to kind of frame the difference in our thinking about art history, and in the way our different parameters that our work exists, for you in the different I was thinking of like, I don't know what you think as a painter of like the language of craft history, but as a ceramicist like that, I think about that a lot in the way that presents itself in your work. And I think for me, like there's certain kinds of artists whose the parameters of their kind of craft, their line making, the precision, their devotion to kind of precision,
Mm-hmm.
those are constructed to convey, to perform, to kind of explore this other things. That's the platform for your idea exploration, right? And so for like your line making, your kind of gilding, all of the language that you've constructed and how you can make your paintings, like that's like the foundation for your thinking, right? So it's like, but for me, it's, I think like the foundation, they're different. I think the reference to like the craft is, I think in your work is, quality of line and structure and precision, right? And that conveys so much. I think for me, I think craft history becomes like a resource, a historical resource to kind of just explore, like how, like in falling in love with the thing and being like, how do I make that? Like, I want that. Like, how do I learn from all of these different kind of like visceral physical experiences
Mm-hmm.
in this history of material, like,
Yeah.
So I think for me, like, and that's my parameters, right? That contain how I explore my work, So it's, I think like, so I don't, they're the same thing, but they're just different parameters of like, thinking.
This is a good segue. We've got actually lots of questions, Gajin and Matt. So maybe we could bring the audience in a little bit, and just to kind of unite both of you, I have a question here from Tony Marsh, who Matt knows well, but the question's for Gajin. So says here, what has stayed with you, Gajin, from your days on the street tagging as you built one form of artistic practice until today, as you approach creating an image in your studio from the perspective of a different kind of artistic practice? I guess I'm curious about what was foundational enough to stick, regardless of the shifting context of your practice.
That would have to be a quote again, like from my mentor and art coach Dave Hickey, is to violate people's expectations. That's what's like stuck on me. I don't know if he's asking for like what kind of materials or how my craft
your identity, what is maybe what the translation of
like what has stuck, right?
Your early arguments of like wanting to to deface, like wanting to agitate a system, you know?
Agitated system.
Seeing that as a problem, right? And seeing that as a point of argument. And I think art collectively is an argument, you know, with the system that is creating all of this havoc, right? And I think art making is this, you know, exploration, philosophical exploration. We're trying to understand from art history, right?
Yeah.
I mean, all of art history is just like, it's cultural history, right? It's the object, it's like the pictorial representation of cultural history, you know? And so I think for as artists, we pull from that just to learn about what the fuck's going on and like what systems are manipulating us, what systems are deteriorating our sense of self, our environment, our economic system. And so for me, I think graffiti is, you know, this really primal kind of violent rejection and kind of argument, you know, and maybe even more of an
rebellion.
What? I don't. Yeah, it's a fucking rebellion space today. You know?
So yeah, no. So it would be like tagging. I think, you know, ever since I gravitated and attracted to graffiti, it was always tagging that was agitating. Even like on my mom's retaining walls that surround my old house, you know, every day there was like some kind of graffiti gang scrawl that was going up and people crossing each other out. So I think that's what has stuck in my work. And I always feel a need to add some kind of tag, a mark, from the influences of graffiti.
What do you think about the community, you know, of your peers, you know, that you grew up with, you know, from like, it seems like that's a continuation, like that graffiti was a language and a way of like communicating and building an understanding, you know, with a group, you know, like that also seems to be something that's continuing that language and changing more.
This idea of camaraderie and teamwork also plays a great deal. And it's, yeah, the community is awesome because like these are some of my oldest friends that I still have to this day. And I think that's very rare for anybody. And yeah, it almost feels like an athletic team or something, because when we were practicing graffiti as a crew, I mean, we would be going out there and challenging other graffiti crews, you know? So it was like a sport in a way. And to see who got up the most out in the streets, or to see who did something that was very spectacular, that everybody oohed and awed about, you know? Yeah, so the community, I think, and the unity amongst the crews or amongst the people in a crew has been really tight, and in my case, and I've had they're like my brothers, you know.
Matt, do you get anything from that sense of community when you do teaching projects, or have you actually done any collaborative art making projects?
I think as a in the context of a class I did, and I think for me, teaching has been this like maybe forced me to. I mean, I don't teach right now, but like having taught in different places and working with younger artists has inevitably probably accelerated my tendency to question everything about my work, you know, like question my mark making, my sensibility, my reference points, my sense of cultural history, whatever that is, you know, like, and I think, so in a way that's become this huge catalyst for the kind of unraveling of my practice to be like that unraveling is the art, you know, that kind of, that exploration is the point, you know, and the objects are kind of markers of that journey. So in a big way, that's been a significant factor in my kind of maturity, or I don't know what, I hate that word because I don't feel mature, but my growth as an artist. And I think also the realization of like, I've always struggled with language and writing from a young age. You know, I've always struggled with articulating ideas. And I think that teaching has been a way of like, maybe allowing me some work to not have it just so stuck up in my head, you know? And one of the things, I think that's why my work's so just emotive and reactionary and just nonverbal reactionary experience, you know, to a thing, like the language, the emotive language of objects, you know, cultural objects. And don't know, yeah. But okay, so one thing is community. I live in Southeast Ohio, and there's a group of like young, sustainable farmers and people trying to kind of deal with kind of sustainable community issues. And that's been a huge kind of grounding force in my life, because as an artist that kind of torments and tears apart every aspect of my sense of reality. Like they become like people who are actively making change in a community, you know, they're kind of dealing with local food systems. They're actually changing culture, you know? And so they've been hugely influential in like the language of agriculture and kind of the ornamentation of landscape as a reference point in my practice. And so I think moving to Ohio has been super grounding in many ways, yeah.
And Gajin, you've lived essentially, aside from the time you were in Las Vegas, you've lived in LA. So you've lived purely in this very deeply urban environment.
Yeah, I've lived in the LA community.
Although I hear that you've had a visitors by some owls of late. So there's a changing aspect to our landscape here with what's been going on.
Yeah, I mean, you know, some of my more recent works have involved animals and creatures. I've always painted like mythological creatures and tigers and animals that don't exist in my real environment. But now I've kind of been influenced or attracted to seeing how the ecosystem sort of works on my own property here. And I've been fortunate enough to be up on the hills of Echo Park, where it's kind of like a forest. We've got lots of trees, and we're surrounded by a lot of greens and trees and vegetation. So it attracts a lot of animals.
Right.
Do you think that like tiger or the animals are like, is it a kind of a mourning? You know, when you look at cultural history or like art history, like in your references, like in the way you depict them, is it a kind of celebration, but also is it like a mourning of something that doesn't exist anymore, or an aspect of culture that we've lost, or an aspect of reality or storytelling that doesn't exist, you know, in our society?
Yeah, I haven't thought about it that deep, but yeah, it's not a mourning. It's more like a celebration, I think, of reconnecting with these images, or introducing these images in a different light or a different way. because I'm juxtaposing these imagery with contemporary images that I see. So it's more like, what would it be like if there was a huge tiger character prowling through the streets of LA? You know, what would someone feel, you know, if they saw that? Those are like kind of like my visions.
So some people might say they take human form in LA. There are still tigers, but they're just not.
Yeah.
But we are very close to nature here. We do have a few questions that I wanted to get to, if you don't mind. One is a comment, which is one of the aspects of both your art that I like very much. This comes from Rowdy Marcus, is a common touch, and consider it a common touch is the ability to take the status quo and set it on its back. So in my mind, you both challenge the status quo, but also in so doing, quote it. Does that make sense to you both consciously?
Or celebrate it. You know, I think what Gajin is saying, like for me, it's like it's a celebration of cultural history and craft history and kind of in the visceralness of a material, you know, but also like a mourning of something that maybe I want to see again in culture, and in that being kind of an argument with structure, sculpting, and my sense of self as an artist.
So we're coming up to a full hour. So maybe we could leave on a sort of an up note and say, is there something that you want to share, like music that you're listening to, or a book that you're reading, or a movie that you've seen that you can recommend, something that is taking you out of your head at this time and you're just enjoying?
I can't get out of my head.
Okay.
I think for me, it's like we need to construct a new reality of things, and I feel like there's a lot of agency and beauty. Like as a father of two kids, like helping them see a new possibilities in culture and in our relationship to the environment. And I see so much optimism and joy and curiosity in them. Like I see us as like explorers of culture, and there's so much richness in that and hope, you know? So I think for me, that's where I get the most kind of peace, is just when I can go make catapults with my kids, you know, and experience, like, you know, just what it is to be alive and garden, and the treat of making, you know, experiencing nature and natural systems, right?
Right.
Cool. Yeah.
Gajin?
You know, I haven't felt that feeling since I used to go gardening in Boyle Heights, or watch my garden grow with my mom or my dad, you know, because I don't have, or Angela and I don't have children. I don't think we get to experience that joy in life. But I still do get plenty of joy in my studio. That's sort of my release, and smoke tons of weed, you know.
Okay, on that high note.
Can I ask you a question, personal question? Does that help you, like individually? Is that, I think that kind of mimics the way our brains already think, you know, and it just helps us magnify it. For you, is that like a philosophical thing or a calming?
What, the smoking weed?
Yeah.
Well, you know, I've been smoking.
Okay, this is a whole other conversation.
No, it's about psychology, you know, and it's about awareness and
it comes from, you know, because I've been smoking weed since I was like 13, so and I'm 48 now, and it's almost like a cigarette, you know. I'd have to go smoke some weed after a meal or something like that, you know, just to kind of clear my mind and get ready to work, you know. And then it psychologically, it does, like, in the head, it for me, at times gives me a great deal of ideas that come from smoking weed. You know, your imagination starts to run. It's just a matter of trying to take notes of what you're thinking in your imagination, because you don't retain it all. And then once in a while, it'll come back and say, and it'll tell you, or you'll tell yourself, "Oh yeah, I had that great idea. Why didn't I think of that?" You know, or
I've been thinking about, like, nature, with nature, like that's nature, you know, it's like nature.
it's natural.
Of,
Yeah.
like, of what the tools that maybe throughout cultural history we used, you know, to search and to find clarity about reality and in ourselves, you know. And it's an interesting time where we're like reorienting, you know, the value of those things that have been demonized, you know, throughout history, or throughout history, like not as tools and a way to kind of guide us, you know. Anyway, it's interesting, and I think
No, it is an interesting
psychological work we need to do as a culture, and it's all kind of connected. And
right.
You know, one of the attendees said we need a whole other panel, because this is opening up a whole other interesting conversation. So maybe we can invite you back and start on another topic. Thank you so much to both of you.
Oh, thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you.
Conversation, and for tolerating this kind of cubicle-like arrangement that we're all dealing with now. But it was an enormous pleasure, and I learned some new things too. And I hope to see you both soon in person, wherever that may be.
I hope to see you guys soon too.
Like, and be safe, everybody. Take things seriously. And
Yeah.
it's not an illusion, you know. What's happening.
It's not an illusion. It's really happening. I invite people to look at LA Louver's website. We do have a virtual show of Matt's new wall fruit sculptures on view, and we have. I know that there's an exciting couple of new pieces coming out of the studio from Gajin that will be premiering in the gallery shortly. So watch this space, both virtually and reality, when we reopen again by appointment at LA Louver in September. So thank you both again. And to everyone who's attended, thank you for being a part of this.
Thanks for all the people.
And apologies to people that I wasn't able to get to in regards to the questions.
Thanks for your time, Gajin.
Okay.
Thank you, and take care out there. I hope everyone starts feeling better.
Yeah, me too.
Okay, take good care. Keep safe.